Imagine this scene. It's September 1221, nestled in a narrow valley amidst the craggy peaks of the Hindu Kush Mountains. An unbelievable event is unfolding. The thunderous rumble of hooves echoes off the canyon walls. Shouts of men pierce the air. The clang of metal against metal rings out. And for the first time in 15 years of relentless conquest, since Genghis Khan declared himself the supreme ruler of all Mongols, the unthinkable is occurring. The Mongol army, widely considered the most formidable military power the medieval world had ever witnessed, is in full flight. This isn't an organized tactical withdrawal or a strategic regrouping. It's a full-blown, desperate retreat born of pure panic. Now, I understand your skepticism. The Mongols, the very force that swept across China, decimated entire civilizations and reduced cities to rubble. Those Mongols, running away? Yes, that's precisely what I'm asserting. And by the end of our discussion, you'll grasp how one desperate prince, leading what was essentially a motley collection of refugees and mountain tribesmen, achieved what might be the most astonishing upset in medieval military history. However, there's a crucial detail about Parwan that most historical accounts overlook. This wasn't merely a battle. This was the moment pride met its match. This was the day the seemingly invincible discovered their vulnerability. And the aftermath. Oh, the aftermath is where this narrative truly gains intrigue, because sometimes winning a battle is merely the prologue to losing the entire war. Let me establish the context for you. By 1221, the Mongol war machine had been devastating Central Asia for 2 years. The Khwarazmian Empire, one of the most commanding Muslim states of its era, had practically dissolved. Bukhara lay in ashes, Samarkand had been conquered, and as for Nishapur, don't even get me started on Nishapur. The Mongols were so utterly thorough there that they reportedly eradicated every living creature in the city, even the cats and dogs. The Shah, the emperor himself, met his end alone and destitute on an island in the Caspian Sea, likely contemplating where everything went wrong. And into this catastrophic landscape steps our central figure, Jalal ad-Din Mingburnu. Honestly, if you were crafting a movie script, you couldn't invent a more compelling underdog hero. The son of the deceased Shah, born to a slave woman, bypassed for succession, yet possessing a quality his legitimate brothers lacked: genuine military prowess. While his empire crumbled around him, while cities surrendered without resistance, while nobles scattered in all directions, Jalal performed the unthinkable. He stood his ground. So, how did a prince, burdened with the status of a refugee and commanding a hastily assembled army, manage to defeat 30,000 Mongol cavalry in an open confrontation? How did he inflict upon Genghis Khan his most humiliating defeat? And here's the pivotal question. If he achieved such a decisive victory at Parwan, why isn't he remembered as the individual who halted the Mongols? Stay with me, because this narrative contains more twists and turns than an episode of Game of Thrones. And unlike Game of Thrones, this conclusion will actually offer a cohesive resolution. If you appreciate military history presented with the intensity of an action film, then subscribe now, because we're only just beginning. Let's delve into the actual adversary Jalal ad-Din faced. Because without comprehending the true nature of the Mongol war machine, it's impossible to fully grasp the sheer audacity of his victory. The Mongols in 1221 were not just another nomadic group on horseback. They represented the most sophisticated military organization on the planet. Bar none, and I am not employing hyperbole for dramatic effect here. Genghis Khan had dedicated 2 decades to refining a system that made every other contemporary army appear like participants in a medieval fair. His forces operated on a precise decimal structure: units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. Every soldier understood his exact position within the hierarchy. Communication, by medieval standards, was virtually instantaneous. They employed flag signals, smoke, and mounted couriers capable of covering 100 kilometers in a single day. These individuals had logistical mastery down to a science, at a time when European knights were still struggling to coordinate a simple cavalry charge. Their equipment was cutting edge. Their composite bows could pierce most armor of the period at a range of 300 meters. Each Mongol warrior typically carried 2 or 3 bows and 60 arrows. They could accurately fire from horseback at a full gallop, a feat that would bring modern cavalry to tears. And their tactics? Forget everything you thought you knew about medieval warfare. The Mongols pioneered feigned retreats, pincer movements, and psychological warfare on an industrial scale. They would simulate a retreat, entice you into pursuit, then swiftly turn around and decimate your disorganized forces. They had been practicing these maneuvers since childhood. It was literally ingrained in their being. And here's a statistic that should truly alarm you. From 1206, when Genghis Khan unified the Mongol tribes, until September 1221, they had not lost a single major pitched battle. Not one. 15 years of continuous warfare across Asia, and their record remained flawless. Cities fell, armies disintegrated, empires crumbled. The Mongols simply kept conquering. The Mongol contingent at Parwan was under the command of Shigi Kutuk, a figure whose involvement lends an intriguing twist to the narrative. Shigi wasn't a grizzled military veteran. He was Genghis Khan's adopted son and, more significantly, served as the empire's chief justice. Known for his intellectual prowess and administrative skills, he was among the earliest Mongols to master reading and writing, playing a crucial role in the codification of Mongol law. Yet, leading 30,000 troops through hostile territory was far from his usual responsibilities. This, in my estimation, marked Genghis Khan's initial error. Khan had just spent 2 years systematically dismantling the Khwarazmian Empire, vanquishing every army that dared oppose him, and with Shah Muhammad deceased and his empire shattered, Khan perceived the pursuit of Jalal ad-Din as a mere mop-up operation. Consequently, he dispatched Shigi with 30,000 men, a substantial force, certainly, but a mere fraction compared to the main Mongol army's 100,000-plus warriors. Essentially, he sent his, quote, zero team. What truly stands out, however, is Shigi Kutuk's palpable overconfidence. Could anyone blame him? He had witnessed the Mongols relentlessly conquer everything in their path for a decade and a half, seen Bukhara fall in 3 days and Samarkand surrender in 5. Why would a refugee prince with a motley crew of fighters be any different? Overconfidence is a potent intoxicant, and Shigi was thoroughly under its spell. What Shigi remained oblivious to was that Jalal ad-Din was no pampered royal playing at soldier. This was a man who had fought alongside his father since boyhood, commanded troops previously, and deeply understood Mongol tactics, having studied them and learned from watching them shatter his empire. Now, in the summer of 1221, barricaded within the fortress city of Ghazni, he was orchestrating a daring plan. Before delving into the battle itself, it's vital to grasp the composition of the forces Jalal ad-Din assembled, which was nothing short of extraordinary. The question then becomes, was he a brilliant strategist meticulously setting a trap, or a desperate man making a final stand? I believe the answer is a combination of both. The summer of 1221 in Ghazni was a period rife with contradictions. The city overflowed with refugees, each bearing tales of Mongol atrocities, families torn asunder, cities reduced to rubble. Such profound trauma either crushes the spirit or forges an unyielding resilience. Jalal ad-Din was achieving the seemingly impossible, constructing an army from scattered remnants. The backbone of his force comprised the shattered remains of the Khwarazmian military, perhaps 10,000 professional soldiers, cavalrymen who had served under his father. A decent number, but undeniably insufficient. Then came the Turks, led by Amin Malik, Jalal's father-in-law, an additional robust contingent. However, the true turning point stemmed from events at Bamiyan. News had spread of a Mongol casualty there. Genghis Khan's grandson had been killed by a defender's arrow. In a brutal reprisal, Khan had ordered the annihilation of every living thing in the city, people, animals, even plants. They literally salted the earth, earning it the moniker, quote, "One." This news rippled through Afghanistan like an electric shock. Suddenly, 30,000 Afghan warriors descended from the mountains. These were tribesmen, highlanders intimately familiar with every pass and valley of the Hindu Kush. They weren't professional soldiers with sophisticated gear. Some likely fought with ancestral weapons. But they possessed an invaluable asset, an unwavering motivation to fight for their homeland, having witnessed firsthand the consequences of surrender. What I find most captivating about Jalal's approach is his absolute certainty that he could not defeat the Mongols in open battle. That would have been suicidal. The Mongols excelled in wide-open fields where their cavalry could freely maneuver, precisely the terrain they preferred, and where they had decimated every other army foolish enough to confront them. Consequently, Jalal ad-Din made a pivotal decision that would define the entire conflict. He would deny them their advantage. He chose Parwan. For those unfamiliar with Afghanistan's rugged topography, it's crucial to understand its nature. The Hindu Kush is not characterized by gentle rolling hills. These are formidable mountains interlaced with deep, narrow valleys where sunlight struggles to penetrate. Parwan provided the ideal setting. A valley perhaps a few hundred meters wide at its broadest point, flanked by imposing cliffs. In such an environment, numerical superiority diminishes, and intimate local knowledge becomes paramount. Jalal meticulously positioned his forces with the precision of a chess grandmaster setting a trap. His infantry occupied the elevated ground, ready to unleash a barrage of arrows, while his cavalry waited, poised for the opportune moment to charge. Crucially, he ensured the Mongols had no choice but to confront him within that confined valley, effectively neutralizing their legendary mobility. It was a tactical stroke of brilliance, yet also a desperate gambit. Failure meant utter defeat with no avenue for escape. When news reached Shigi Kotuk that Jalal was consolidating his forces at Parwan, he made his second critical error. He neglected to await reinforcements and failed to properly scout the terrain. Instead, he directly advanced his 30,000 cavalry toward the valley, likely expecting a swift victory by day's end. After all, what threat could a defeated prince and a collection of mountain tribesmen pose to the world's most formidable army? The valley lay in silent anticipation, the summer heat causing the air to shimmer. Amidst those stony confines, nearly 100,000 men were poised for a confrontation that would culminate in one of the medieval era's most astounding battles. Absolutely no one, not Shigi, not Genghis Khan, perhaps not even Jalal himself, foresaw the impending events. The trap was meticulously laid, the bait eagerly taken. Only the execution remained. The initial 2 days of the battle unfolded like a strategic chess match. Shigi Kutuk relentlessly tested the Khwarazmian defenses, seeking a vulnerability. However, Jalal had meticulously positioned his forces, rendering every Mongol probe ineffective against well-prepared defenses. Arrows rained down from the elevated positions, and the constricted valley nullified the Mongols' numerical superiority. It must have been profoundly frustrating for Shigi. Nothing in his prior experience or an established Mongol military doctrine had prepared him for an adversary who refused to be drawn out or pursued, an enemy who wielded patience as a potent weapon. On the second day, Shigi attempted a clever ruse. He ordered his men to mount straw dummies on spare horses, creating the illusion of a much larger force. This classic Mongol tactic, a form of psychological warfare, aimed to intimidate the enemy, convince them they faced insurmountable odds, and provoke errors. And remarkably, it should have worked. Most commanders of that period would have fallen for it. Yet, Jalal al-Din was no ordinary commander. Having fought alongside his father for years and meticulously studied Mongol tactics, he observed the straw warriors without flinching. If anything, it conveyed vital information. Shigi Kutuk was growing desperate. The third day dawned with an undeniable tension, palpable enough to be cut with a blade. Both factions understood that a resolution was imminent. The Mongols could not indefinitely remain confined within the valley, and Jalal's coalition could not be sustained without a decisive victory. Something had to give. It was at this juncture that Shigi made his fateful error. He committed to a full-scale assault. The Mongol right flank surged directly toward the division led by Saif al-Din Iraq, the Afghan chieftain. Here, the underlying psychology is crucial. The Afghans had no prior experience confronting Mongols in open battle. Many were likely consumed by fear, questioning their decision to descend from their mountains. As the thunderous wave of Mongol cavalry bore down upon them, every natural instinct must have screamed for retreat. Yet, Iraq held his ground. His men steadfastly maintained their positions, firing from a standing stance, precisely as Jalal had instructed. Following their established playbook, the Mongols executed a feigned retreat. It was a textbook maneuver they had perfected countless times. Charge, prompt enemy fire, feign retreat, lure the enemy into a disordered pursuit, then swiftly turn and obliterate them. Simple. Tragically, 500 of Iraq's men could not resist the impulse. Witnessing the Mongols seemingly fleeing, their warrior instincts compelled them to chase. They broke ranks and pursued. Right on schedule, the Mongols wheeled around and massacred all 500. For a fleeting moment, it must have appeared as if the battle was unfolding precisely as Shigi had anticipated. The enemy was fragmenting. Victory seemed within reach. However, Jalal al-Din, who had been keenly observing and patiently waiting, recognized his opportunity. What transpired next is the stuff of legend. Jalal personally spearheaded a charge directly into the Mongol center. Not with his entire force, he was far too astute for that, but with his elite cavalry, his most skilled warriors, those who had been with him from the very beginning. He struck the Mongols at their most vulnerable point, precisely as they were congratulating themselves on the demise of those 500 men, just when they believed victory was theirs. The impact must have been devastating. Jalal slammed into the Mongol formation like a powerful hammer, instantly altering the entire dynamic of the battle. Recall that these Mongols were crammed into a constricting valley. They couldn't maneuver, execute their renowned pincer movements, or conduct their signature feigned retreats. They were tightly packed. Their greatest asset, mobility, had become a significant handicap. This was where the meticulously chosen geography by Jalal paid immense dividends. His troops positioned on the heights began unleashing a torrent of arrows into the dense Mongol formations below. The confined valley transformed into a lethal arena. Mongol soldiers found themselves under assault from the front, from above, and from the flanks. They attempted to retreat, yet there was no escape route. They tried to advance, but they were hemmed in. For the first time in their storied careers, these seasoned Mongol warriors encountered a situation where skill and discipline held no sway. They were utterly trapped. It's crucial to grasp the significance of this moment, as it stands unparalleled in military annals up to this point. These were the Mongol warriors who had subjugated half of Asia. They had never suffered a defeat. Indeed, they had never even come close to one. And now, they witnessed their ordered ranks dissolving. They watched their comrades fall. They heard their commanders issuing unexecutable orders because there was simply no room to maneuver. And for the first time in their lives, they experienced an emotion entirely foreign to them: fear. Jalal must have observed it too, that specific instant when an adversary's eyes shift, when assurance gives way to apprehension, and then to outright terror. He then commanded a full-scale advance. Every Khwarazmian, every Turk, every Afghan combatant who had patiently waited, who had observed their brethren perish, who had held their ground, now charged simultaneously. The Mongol formation disintegrated. What ensued was not a battle, it was an outright slaughter. And I do not employ that term lightly, but no other word accurately describes the events in that valley. The Mongol cavalry, packed tightly and unable to maneuver, began to fracture. Not a tactical withdrawal, but a complete collapse. Panic seized them. Men abandoned their weapons and fled. Some sought to surrender. Others attempted to fight their way out. None of it mattered. The valley had become a charnel house. Jalal al-Din's forces pursued them relentlessly. These were men who had seen their cities incinerated, their families butchered. They had heard the horrifying accounts from Nishapur and Merv. There was absolutely no compassion in their hearts. And frankly, considering the atrocities the Mongols had committed across Central Asia, can one truly fault them? Historical accounts estimate that over 15,000 Mongols perished in that valley, precisely half of their 30,000-strong contingent. In military lexicon, this isn't merely a defeat, it's an annihilation. Hundreds of Mongols were captured alive. And this is where the narrative darkens considerably. The Khwarazmian forces executed them by driving stakes into their ears. It's a gruesome detail meticulously recorded by medieval chroniclers, and it vividly illustrates the profound rage and trauma these people endured. This transcended mere military triumph. It was about vengeance. It was about making the Mongols experience even a fraction of the anguish they had inflicted. Shiki Hutug, however, managed to escape with the remnants of his forces. Imagine his predicament in that moment. Adopted son of Genghis Khan, entrusted with a formidable army of 30,000 elite warriors, now in full retreat, having lost half his command to a prince widely considered defeated. The humiliation must have been excruciating. Yet, what truly captivates me about this juncture is Jalal al-Din's extraordinary achievement. He had accomplished the impossible, vanquished the Mongols in open combat, and he fully understood its significance. According to the chronicler Ibn al-Athir, Jalal dispatched a message directly to Genghis Khan himself. The precise words were, "In which locality do you want the battle to be, so that we may make our way to it?" Can you fathom the audacious bravery, the sheer impudence of this individual? He had just decimated a Mongol army and was now, quite literally, challenging Genghis Khan to name the next battlefield where he wished to be defeated. And critically, the news of this victory spread with lightning speed. Reports of the triumph at Parwan reached every corner of what had once been the Khwarazmian Empire. Cities that had submitted to the Mongols suddenly found renewed courage. Merv erupted in rebellion, spearheaded by a commander named Kush Tagin Pahlawan. Herat expelled its Mongol garrison. Even Bukhara witnessed uprisings. For the first time since this nightmare began, people harbored the belief that perhaps, just perhaps, the Mongol juggernaut could be halted. If you're finding this deep dive into medieval military history engaging, please consider liking this video. It assists the algorithm. And honestly, narratives like these warrant widespread telling. We dedicate so much attention to Mongol victories that we tend to forget they weren't, in fact, invincible. However, this is where the story takes its tragic twist. And truly, this is the segment that always profoundly affects me whenever I revisit it. Because Jalal al-Din had just orchestrated the upset of the century. He had unified disparate tribes and professional soldiers. He had outmaneuvered the Mongols. He had triumphed. And then, he jeopardized it all over the most absurdly trivial reason imaginable. That very evening, as his forces celebrated and divided the spoils of their victory, a profound disagreement erupted. The contention revolved around a white horse, a Mongol steed, likely a magnificent specimen that someone had captured. Both Amin Malik, Jalal's father-in-law, and the Turkish commander, and Saif al-Din Igrak, the leader of the Afghan contingent, coveted it. This should have been a minor squabble. A truly capable commander would have intervened, made a decision, and moved past the incident. However, Jalal sided with his father-in-law, and Amin Malik publicly used a whip on Igro right in front of the entire army. It's crucial to understand the gravity of this action. This was far beyond a mere insult. In the warrior societies of medieval Central Asia, such an act constituted the ultimate disgrace. Igro was a respected leader, a commander who had recently defended his position against a Mongol assault. His soldiers had sacrificed their lives following his directives, and now he was being publicly flogged like a common servant. That very night, the 30,000 Afghan warriors abandoned the camp. They kept their campfires burning to create the illusion of their continued presence. By dawn, they had completely vanished, just gone. Upon waking, Jalal discovered he had lost half his army overnight. Let me reiterate, he had just achieved the most significant victory of his military career, inflicting the Mongols' worst defeat in 15 years, only to lose half his forces due to a dispute over a horse and a moment of wounded pride. Honestly, this is incredibly frustrating to me, not as a historian, but as a human being. You had one critical objective, to maintain the cohesion of the coalition. You had just demonstrated that the Mongols were not invincible. You had ignited hope in countless individuals. And yet, you squandered it all because you couldn't control your father-in-law's arrogance. Leadership extends beyond mere tactics and strategy. It fundamentally involves understanding people. It means recognizing that sometimes the most pivotal battles are those fought within your own ranks. And here lies the bitter irony. Jalal understood the implications. He knew Genghis Khan would pursue him with the full might of the Mongol army. He realized he couldn't prevail with only 30,000 men. Therefore, he made the only viable choice. He consolidated his remaining troops, gathered as many refugees as would follow him, and journeyed eastward toward the Indus River. His intention was to seek refuge in India. Perhaps there, beyond the reach of the Mongol forces, he could survive. But Genghis Khan had different plans. When news of the defeat at Parwan reached Genghis Khan, chroniclers state he was incandescent with rage. This was no ordinary anger. This was a man whose reputation was built on his perceived invincibility, whose entire empire was founded on the principle that resistance was futile. And now, a mere refugee prince had handed his forces their most crushing defeat ever. The Khan immediately ceased his current activities and personally led his army southwards into Afghanistan. He paused at the battlefield of Parwan. Envision the scene, the great Khan himself traversing a valley strewn with the corpses of his warriors. 15,000 fallen Mongols. Medieval accounts record that he summoned Shigi Kutuk and declared, "You were unaware of the battleground, and both of you were at fault." Both at fault implied both Shigi and the very terrain itself. There's an almost philosophical depth to that statement. Genghis grasped that Shigi had been vanquished not solely by Jalal's skill, but also by the geographical conditions. The Mongols had been enticed into combat on terrain that neutralized every advantage they possessed. However, a key characteristic that made Genghis Khan truly formidable was his ability to learn from his errors. He did not execute Shigi Kutuk. He did not strip him of his rank. Instead, he educated him. He guided him across the battlefield, explaining the missteps, how Jalal had exploited the terrain, and where the Mongol formation had proven vulnerable. It was akin to receiving a masterclass in military strategy from history's most successful conqueror, with the caveat that your tuition fee was the loss of half your men. Meanwhile, Jalal al-Din was in full flight. His procession included not only soldiers, but thousands of refugees, families, children, and elderly individuals who, upon hearing of Parwan, believed they might, just might, escape to India. These civilians significantly impeded their progress. What should have been a rapid military advance transformed into a laborious migration, with the Mongols closing in behind them like an approaching tempest. The Mongols could cover 100 kilometers a day when necessary. Jalal's column, weighed down by refugees, was fortunate to manage half that distance. The arithmetic was stark and unforgiving. They were destined to be overtaken. The only uncertainty was where. It occurred on November 24, 1221, on the banks of the Indus River near modern-day Kalabagh in Pakistan. Jalal had nearly reached safety. The river was right there. India lay on the opposite bank. Deliverance seemed within grasp. But the Mongols arrived first, and this time Genghis Khan himself was at the helm. No more secondary commanders, no more inexperienced scholar generals. The Khan arrayed his forces in an enormous crescent formation, pinning Jalal's army against the river. His sons, Chagatai and Ogadai, commanded the flanks. Genghis personally controlled the reserve, strategically placed to thwart any escape route. This was textbook Mongol warfare executed by the Grand Master himself. Jalal al-Din positioned his remaining 30,000 troops with their backs to the river. He commanded the center with his 5,000 elite warriors. Amin Malik led the right flank with the Turkish cavalry. The Afghan contingent, or what remained of their forces, anchored the left flank, likely under the command of Timur Malik. Although their defensive position was formidable, everyone recognized its true meaning: a final, desperate stand. The engagement commenced at dawn. The Khwarazmian left flank heroically withstood repeated assaults, fighting with the sheer desperation of men aware that retreat was no option. Initially, Ogedai's Mongol forces on the left actually faltered and were pushed back. For a brief moment, it seemed that another miraculous outcome might be within reach, but Genghis Khan had learned a crucial lesson. Observing the formidable strength of Jalal's position along the ridge, he dispatched an elite contingent led by a general named Bela to ascend the heights and launch an attack from above. Once more, the topography proved decisive, but this time it favored the Mongols. This flanking maneuver ultimately shattered the Khwarazmian battle array. Timur Malik perished in the ensuing conflict. As the formation disintegrated, Jalal al-Din, witnessing his army's collapse around him, made a legendary decision. He spurred his horse towards the Indus River, swollen and fast-flowing from recent rains, its banks at least 20 feet high. He charged directly into it. Mongol arrows rained down around him. Men cried out for him to stop, yet Jalal al-Din, the last sultan of the Khwarazmian Empire, plunged into the churning waters below, horse and all. In an astonishing feat, he miraculously made it across. Though the current carried him downstream, he reached the opposite bank alive. What truly captivates me about this juncture is Genghis Khan's reaction. The Khan, the very individual who had systematically dismantled Jalal's army for 2 years and destroyed everything he held dear, stood on the riverbank and observed his adversary execute what was essentially a suicidal leap to freedom. According to numerous historical accounts, Genghis then turned to his officers and remarked, "A father should be proud to have such a son." This statement embodies the profound respect between two warriors, an acknowledgement that even in defeat, a unique kind of glory can emerge. Jalal al-Din had lost the war, his empire, and everything he possessed. Yet he had earned something rarely bestowed upon men in history: the genuine admiration of Genghis Khan himself. However, let's delve into the broader historical significance of the battle at Parwan. The startling reality is that it represented the sole substantial defeat the Mongols endured throughout their entire Central Asian campaign. The only one. Every other engagement, every siege, every confrontation resulted in a Mongol victory. Parwan stands as irrefutable proof that they were not invincible, demonstrating that a capable commander, employing the correct strategy on favorable terrain, could best them. This, I believe, is a crucial insight. We often focus so heavily on Mongol triumphs that we inadvertently foster a myth of their utter invincibility. But Jalal al-Din shattered that illusion. He showed that 3 critical elements were necessary: profound understanding of the local geography, the discipline to resist Mongol stratagems, and the sheer courage to stand and fight. Most armies of that era possessed none of these. Jalal had all 3. Yet a tragic irony demands our attention. He won the battle, but ultimately lost the war. The reason for his ultimate failure was not military, it was political. That white horse incident, that moment of ego and wounded pride, that catastrophic lapse in leadership, caused 30,000 Afghan warriors to desert. This single event extinguished any hope of sustained resistance against the Mongols. Had Jalal maintained his coalition, had he managed the internal factions within his own camp with even half the skill he exhibited on the battlefield, could history have unfolded differently? Could he have mustered additional forces? Could he have made the Mongol conquest of Central Asia so costly that they would have retreated? We will never truly know, but the possibility continues to resonate. Jalal al-Din himself survived for another decade, traversing Persia, Azerbaijan, and Anatolia, at times a conqueror, at others, a refugee. He never succeeded in reclaiming his empire. In 1231, he was killed, likely by Kurdish villagers, though the precise circumstances remain unclear. His remaining forces continued as Khwarazmian mercenaries, fighting across the Middle East for years thereafter, but the dream died with him. Afghanistan, however, would remember. The very mountains where Jalal made his defiant stand would later prove to be the undoing of other empires. The British in the 19th century, the Soviets in the 20th, and the Americans in the 21st. There is an inherent quality in that terrain, in the warrior ethos, in the unwavering refusal to submit that has persisted for 800 years. Parwan illustrated that success wasn't about being the strongest or the most technologically advanced. It was about intimate knowledge of the land, fighting on one's own terms, and an unyielding resolve. So, what wisdom can we glean from this? Perhaps it is this: no force is truly unstoppable. Every formidable power possesses a vulnerability. Every empire has its limits. But winning a battle is insufficient if one cannot maintain unity among their people afterwards. The significance of the battle won may pale in comparison to the coalition preserved. And sometimes, the greatest adversary is not the army before you. Here's the rewritten text. The self-importance and arrogance within your own ranks often prove to be your downfall. Now, I'm eager to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments section below. Do you believe Jalal ad-Din might have triumphed in the conflict had he managed to preserve his alliance? Was he a tactical genius who merely faced misfortune, or did his own leadership shortcomings seal his fate from the outset? I personally review each contribution, and frankly, this type of historical discussion is precisely what energizes me. If you found this in-depth exploration of a clash that truly merits greater recognition engaging, then please hit that like button and sign up for more unvarnished military history content. Make sure to share this with anyone who believes the Mongols were indomitable. They absolutely need to hear this account, because on September, no specific date given, 1221, in a confined valley in Afghanistan, 30,000 Mongol warriors advanced, and 15,000 failed to retreat. It marked the moment the supposedly unstoppable force was finally halted. It was the day a single individual demonstrated that even titans can be brought low. It was the day Afghanistan conveyed a message to the world that continues to resonate. We will never yield. Thank you for tuning in. I'll catch you next time.